Welcome to Module 3 in this Baseball5 webinar. In this third module, for game officials, we will go through the responsibilities of the individual members of the crew, as well as the mechanics and movements in the game. We'll start with some general recommendations we can make for all the crew members, which are simple and straightforward. First, know the rule book. Be close to the play at all times, be close to the action. Be definitive and clear with your calls. Don't be shy or hesitate, and be an example to all that are watching. Keep those basics in mind as we start the presentation. In the first part, we'll go through the responsibilities and proper mechanics of the field officials. For WBSC official competitions, there will be a crew of 4 game officials, with 3 on the field, the home plate official and 2 field officials, with the 4th member of the crew working at a table. You'll all have to learn all the different duties because a crew will often change positions. And because of that, we'll go through all of the official duties separately. But we'll start with the home plate official. The home plate official is the chief of the field officials for every game. They're the one who sets the pace to the game, and this aspect is extremely important in Baseball 5 because we want the game to be fast and dynamic. In this presentation, we'll call the home plate officials the PO for plate official. You see that the PO is placed on the side of the batter's box, normally the third base side. And also see that before calling play ball, the PO must check to make sure that the other field officials, the 5 infielders, and the table official are all ready and that the batter is in the batter's box. The PO must always check and watch the batter's feet carefully to see if they step on or outside of the lines of the batter's box when they're hitting the ball. They must also watch to see that the first bounce of the ball after it's been hit is beyond the 4.5-meter line, and if it's in fair or foul territory. And of course, the plate official will also be the judge of plays at home plate, ruling the runner either safe or out. As we already said, the PO controls the pace of the game, and an example of this is that they're the ones that call time when it's appropriate. And when doing so, they always have to be clear, raising up their hands and being loud. Kind of continuing on that theme, you got to note that the PO is really in charge of the communication on the field. They're in charge of the communication between teams and the table official and the other officials. They'll use signs to indicate the rotation or the lack of a need to rotate to the other field officials according to the game situation. And before we move on to the next point, I'll note that we'll see examples of these rotations very shortly in some nice animated graphics. It's very important for the PO that before every play they remind their colleagues what the situation is and the proper mechanics and rotation for the situation. But finally, to point 8 on your screen there, you see that the PO has to be ready to move because they shift to third base to judge a play at third base whenever field official 2 has to remain near the second base bag and when field official 1 shifts to home plate. So to put it more simply, the plate official is sometimes also making the calls at third base, so you have to be aware of that and be moving at all times. Before we move on to field official 1, which you see on your screen, just a note about plate officials. And this is not worth writing down on the presentation, but you should always remember that as the plate official, you're the one handing the ball off to the next batter. Do it on a bounce, always. Never throw a ball straight at the batter. And please remember to ask the defense to bounce the ball to you as well. That's just something you'll get into a habit of the more you serve as a plate official. But now we'll move on and look at the duties for the first base field official, 0-1. The general positioning for the first base official, who again we're going to call 0-1 in this presentation, their general positioning is to be placed outside of the first baseline in foul territory with a viewing angle of 45 degrees for a better view of the play at first base. At the beginning of the play, they watch to see if the first bounce of the ball is in fair or foul territory. They then check to see if the batted ball bounces before it reaches the fence or if it goes over the fence. They also watch to see if any of the defensive players touch the batted ball in the case that the ball goes straight to the fence or over it. Because as you know from previous modules, there's a difference between a ball that touches a defender before going into the fence or a ball that just flies right into it or right over it. Another important job for field official 01 is that they have to watch and make sure that the batter runner steps on the extension of first base. And again, that's to avoid collisions at first base. Moving on from that, 01 also checks that the batter runner remains inside the safe area whenever they get tagged by a defensive player after initially being ruled safe at first base. Once a batter or a runner now at first base is on first, 01 has the responsibility to watch that runner and make sure they don't leave the base early before the batter hits the ball. They also have to watch to see if the batter runner steps on first base when rounding the base in the attempt of running to second. For example, if a batter is trying to turn a hit into a double, 01 needs to watch first base and make sure the batter runner steps on first base on their way to second. Pretty straightforward stuff, but important to note anyway. More duties for 01. That first note you see, which is number 9 on your screen, is a note about body positioning of the official. They're required to keep both hands attached to their body. This gives them more time to judge and call the play. So an appropriate stance, for example, would be to have the hands on the hips. Just keep your hands attached to your body one way or another. They also have to see if a runner on first base on their way to second is hit by the batted ball. And they must also watch to see if any defensive players touch the ball before it went into the base runner. Obviously, a big job for 01 is to judge plays at first base, call a batter runner safe or out. And they always have to be ready to shift to home plate to judge a play whenever the home plate official has to go to third base to judge a play. And we talked about that when we were talking about the PO, the home plate official's duties. Sometimes they're covering third, and in those cases, it's up to 01 to race down and cover plays at home plate. So those are the duties of 01 in a nutshell. Now we'll move on to 02. This is the second and third base field official, who we'll call 02 from now on. And a note that this is the only field official that is always inside of fair territory. As a result, they must concentrate on not interfering with the game, not getting in the way of the ball. And that can be hard when you're on a pretty small field and a ball is coming at you pretty hard. So you have to be nimble to be 0-2. One of the primary responsibilities is to watch the batted ball to make sure that it bounces before it hits the fence, or also to note if it flies straight into the fence or over it. And like the other officials, they need to watch and see if any of the defensive players have touched the batted ball in the event that the ball goes straight into the fence or over it. They also need to watch the runner on second base to make sure that they don't leave the base before the batter hits the ball. They need to check if the runner steps on second base when rounding second base in the attempt of running to third. So, for example, a batter who's trying for a triple, obviously they need to step on first base and step on second base first. 0-2's the man watching, or the woman, watching second base to make sure it gets stepped on the way to third. They also need to check if the runner at second base on their way to third is hit by a batted ball, and they need to pay attention closely to see if any defensive players touch the batted ball before it went into the base runner. O2 also judges all the plays at second base. Pretty simple, calling somebody safer out at second. And let's talk a little bit, before we show you the examples in a little while, about the movements of O2, which are dictated by plays. And always they have to be mindful of avoiding interfering with the game. They don't want to get in the way of defensive players, but they also don't want to get in the way of runners. So it's smart for O2 to remain relatively close to the fence. They play back beyond the infield. And just a reminder that O2, being the closest to the fence, has to check to see if the batted ball bounces before it hits the fence or if it goes above it. They probably have the best view to make this call. They also check to see if any of the defensive players touch the batted ball. And like they were responsible for watching the base runner step on second, O2 also needs to check to see if the runner steps on third base when rounding the base in their attempt to run home. There is an exception to this, which we'll see shortly, and that's when the plate official has rotated to cover third base. But generally speaking, it's up to O2 to keep an eye on third base and make sure that the runner touches third base on their way home. And just finishing up with a couple of examples of duties that we've talked about for the other officials. O2 has to keep an eye on the runner at second, make sure they don't leave early. And as we noted, they oftentimes have to make the call at third base of safe or out, except when that plate official has rotated to cover third base. I know some of this might sound repetitive, but I think it's smart to say it over and over because it's important to know these rules perfectly. And now we'll add some visual aids, some graphics to go along with all these words and all these rules that I've just read you, that hopefully makes the rotation piece of it make more sense. Before we get to the animated graphics though, let's start with the field. And I'm sure you all remember the measurements. You've got the batter's box, which I'm going to move my cursor into here. The batter's box, which is 3 by 3 meters. You've got the distance between the bases of 13 meters, and then another 5 meters beyond the bases where you get to the fence. The bases are 50 centimeters per side. The safe area, the extension past the bases, are 1.5 meters in length, and the fences are 1 meter high. Foul territory, which you see on either side of the first and third base lines, is 3 meters wide, and the no-hit zone, which is indicated by these white lines right here that go across the field, this further no-hit zone, which is used for adult competition and everything over the 15U level, that's 4.5 meters in front of home plate. So just a reminder there of the field dimensions. Now is where things really get interesting. And I hope you enjoy these animations as much as I do when we get to them. The setup here is with nobody on base. You see the home plate official is placed on the third base side of the batter's box. And after the batter hits the ball, and of course, after the plate official checks to make sure they didn't step on or outside of the batter's box line, and after noting that the first bounce is beyond the no-hit zone and in fair territory, this home plate umpire shifts to third base, as you see right there, so that they're ready to make a call if there's a triple. The field official at second base, once the home plate official shifts to third, has to move to the other side of the second base bag to call an eventual play at second base. And you see that slight movement right there. He started essentially right behind second base, but now moves over to the first base side of the second base bag. Meanwhile, the field official at first base, after the batter hits the ball, takes 2 steps inside the field to better view the play at first base. So that's his first movement. It was slight, but he went from foul territory to fair territory. And then, if the batter's really moving around the bases, the first base official, 0-1, has to shift to home plate to make an eventual call there. So you see there's a lot of movements that everybody has to be ready to make, and that's in the situation where there are no runners on base. I want to go back and just show you that first base one again. You see where he starts in foul territory, and I keep saying he, but obviously it could be a man or a woman. We'll say they. They start in foul territory, they move in to make the call at first, and then they have to race to home plate in case they end up making a call there. Pretty cool. We'll move on to a situation with a runner on first base. And it's the same routine as the previous slide for the plate official. He's placed on the third base side of the batter's box. They watch to make sure the batter doesn't step on the lines of the batter's box. They watch to make sure the first bounce is after the no-hit zone and in fair territory. And then they shift to third base. 0-2, after the hit, has to move to the other side of the second base bag for an eventual play at second. 0-1, after the batter hits the ball, takes 2 steps inside the field to better view the play at first base. There's that slight shift again. And then, as the batter goes to second base, 0-1 has to race to cover home plate. And if there was going to be a call at home plate, it would be made by 0-1. So it's important that 0-1 is always on the move and ready to cover home plate. Moving on to our next situation. This is an example with a runner on second. And it's the same routine as on the previous slides for the plate official. Starting on the third base side of the batter's box, watching the batter to make sure that they don't step on the lines or outside of the lines, watching to make sure that the first bounce of the ball is beyond the no-hit zone and in fair territory, and then the sprint to third base to watch and see if the runner steps on the base, if they continue on their way home, or to be in position to make a call on what could be a play at third base. 0-2, you'll notice in this situation, has already started on the other side of the second base bag, as we saw. And after the batter hits the ball, they shift to first base to make the call on the play at first base. So you see, 0-2, starting on the first base side of the second base bag, as soon as the ball's put in play, he races over to make a call at first base. If the batter follows on to second base, so if the batter is attempting a double, he then has to shift back to second base to make the call there. He's doing all of that because in this situation, 0-1 starts in foul territory, pretty much even with the first base bag. A little bit in front of the first base bag, actually, as you see there. And 0-1 in this situation first has to watch to see if the batted ball is fair or foul on its first bounce. And then after that, they shift home to make a call on an eventual play at the plate if there is one. So you see things are a lot different here in this situation, which begins with a runner on second. Now we'll move on to another situation, and I hope I'm not moving too quickly here, and if I am, I apologize, but I suppose you can just rewind it and watch these animations again. But this is a situation with a runner on third. And this is where you see the plate official moving. Anytime there's a runner on third base, the plate official stands on the opposite side of the batter's box, on the first base side of the batter's box in foul territory, and he remains there. They remain there to make a call at home plate without interfering with the play. 0-2 stays at second base in case there's a runner at first and has to make a call at second, or if the batter is trying to turn it into a double. That's his basic positioning, their basic positioning there, as you see. But they can also shift towards third base in case there will be a play there. So 0-2's primary responsibility is to watch second base for all the things that they traditionally look for, but because the plate official is so far away from third, the job of watching third base falls to 0-2. If there's also a runner on second, he has to keep an eye on that runner and make sure they step on the third base bag. Now we come to 0-1, who starts in foul territory, or just about on the line, as you see in the example, if first base is open, and then moves in to call the play at first base, that good 45-degree angle viewing spot, which you see the example here displays. If there's already a runner on first, he starts inside the field, inside fair territory for a better view. And 0-1's job is to follow the batter runner if the batter runner goes to second base. So it's counterclockwise rotation from 0-1 and 0-2 and a stationary PO when there's a runner on third. Moving on to a new situation, we see runners on first and second. The plate official is placed back in their more traditional spot on the third base side of the batter's box. After the batter hits the ball, and again, after making sure that the batter doesn't step on the line and that the first bounce is beyond the no-hit zone and in fair territory, the PO checks to see if the runner on second steps on third while rounding the base. So he watches that lead runner to make sure that he steps on third base, or they step on third base as they round and come home. 0-2, meanwhile, watches to see if the runner at first steps on second while rounding the base, and then eventually follows that second runner over to third base. 0-1 starts in fair territory for a better view if he starts earlier. To put it more clearly, he starts in fair territory to make sure that the runners don't start early before the batters hit the ball. And then he follows the batter runner to second base if the batter runner should attempt to go to second base. So again, it's the counterclockwise rotation for 0-1 and 0-2, and it's a stationary plate official. And obviously you can tell by this example, if there was to be a play at the plate, it would be up to the plate official to make that call. That's a lot of activity, I know, and I hope that it gives you a pretty good understanding of it. You can watch those rotations over and over, and obviously there's no substitute for practice, so once you're on the field, you'll get the hang of it. And now we'll look at whose responsibility it is to watch the fence. This is an example of a situation with no runners on base, or a runner at first, or runners at first and second. So in this situation, You see the positioning of the field officials, and you see their responsibilities in terms of watching the fence. And you'll notice first that the plate official has almost no responsibility watching the fence in this situation. They only have to watch balls batted into the fence or over the fence in third base side foul territory. That little bit of green in third base side foul territory, the plate official is watching. 0-2 watches almost all of fair territory from the third base foul line to halfway between first and second bases. 0-1 in this situation is in charge of watching the fence from halfway between the first and second base bags until foul territory ends on the first base side. So again, these responsibilities apply when there is no runners on base, when there's a runner on first base, or when there are runners on first and second. We'll move on to new fence responsibilities. And this is with the officials positioned for a runner on second base. So this is the position of the officials when there's a runner at second base. And what that means for fence responsibility is that the plate official watches the fence from foul territory on the third base side to halfway between second and third base. That green in left field foul territory and then between second and third. 0-2 is responsible for the entire middle portion of the fencing. They watch from halfway between second and third to halfway between first and second, while 0-1 watches from halfway between first and second all the way until foul territory on the first base side. So there's actually an equal portion of responsibility for each official in this situation, which would be with a runner on second base. There's one more fence responsibility example to give you. And this shows the positioning of the field officials if there's a runner at third base. And you note the crucial difference here is that the plate official is on the first base side of home plate. As a result, the plate official watches the balls batted into or over the fence only in foul territory on the first base side. 0-2 again winds up with the biggest fence responsibility. They watch all the way from the end of foul territory on the third base side until the middle of the field, all that red on the left side of the outfield fence. And then 0-1 watches from the middle of the field to the end of fair territory on the first base side. So it's almost cut directly in half, with 0-2 being responsible for left field and 0-1 being responsible for right field. It's just that the plate official is responsible for watching foul territory, which makes 0-1's job just a little bit easier. Those are your fence responsibilities in 3 different situations, depending on how the field officials are aligned, which of course is dependent upon where there are base runners on the field at any given time. And now we get to see a photo from an actual Baseball 5 event. And we're showing you this not because it's perfect. It's actually far from it. Here you see the position of field officials that are not completely right, but there's a reason. We'll start at home plate. The home plate official is in the right position. That's the gentleman circled in green to the left of the batter's box. He's in the correct position. The first base official should have been in foul territory at the beginning before the ball is hit to better see if the first bounce of the ball is in foul or fair territory. So the first base official, 0-1, is circled in red with that green arrow showing where he should be positioned. But at the time of this event, the rules were different. So he was doing the right thing at the time. It's just that the rules have evolved. The second base official should also be moved slightly. He should be on the other side of the base. You see, he's circled in red with a green arrow to where he should be. But again, in this tournament, things were different. There was actually a field official covering third base as well. You don't see that official in this picture, but he was there, and that's why the second base official was in a different spot. But again, in green, you see the correct positioning. The home plate umpire or official, the PO, circled in green, and the slight changes for 01 and 02. All that said, for the on-field officials, we have unsaid, until now, the duties of the fourth member of the crew, the table official. We'll start with a note about positioning of the table officials. They must be seated in a position where they can see the action, so a place with good visibility, a spot that has easy access to the playing field, and a place where they can always see the plate official and the plate official can see them without interfering with the game. So that's where the table official should be set up, and there's actually going to be a slide right at the end that shows you where you should set up your table. But let's look at the duties of the table official. First and foremost, they need to control all the technical aspects of the game. They need to collect the lineup card from teams somewhere between 15 and 90 minutes before the games start, depending on the stature of the event. And most of the time, they'll have to push team managers to provide the lineup card on time. And in best-of-3 matches, this becomes even more complicated. They may have to get team managers to provide the lineup card for the next game in the middle of the one that's being played. Once they get the lineups, the table official has to distribute it to the local organizing committee to make copies for other appropriate individuals, the media, for example. And then the table official has to fill in the scorecard with all the names that are in the lineup card that they've gotten from the manager. Overall, their job is to enforce the regulations as written in the specific tournament regulations during the match or the game. The table official receives and judges protests related to technical matters that come from participating teams. They're the first official to deal with these matters. They are also the first official to rule in matters of discipline that arise from situations on the playing field involving players, coaches, game officials, or really anybody who's on the field. The table official also has to keep the scorecard and manage substitutions during the game. The TO, the table official, has to give the okay to the home plate umpire or the home plate official to start a new play. And when the game is over, it's up to the TO to take a photo or scan the scorecard, have it signed, and immediately share it with all interested parties. They give match results, and in some cases box scores, to each delegation, to the technical directors of the tournament, the game officials, and the media after the game. They also produce, verify, and submit all statistical data related to the match to the technical director. This is for keeping of statistics in official events. So there you see a summation of the table officials' duties, and you can see that they're very broad. They're really involved in all aspects of the game. So while they're not making safe and out calls on the field, they're very important. And you'll see why as we get into our final piece of this module, which addresses protests. And there's 2 examples of protests that we're going to look at. This first comes if the protest occurs on the game-ending play. If there is a protest on the play that ends the game, the coach or delegation leader has to announce to the table official their intention of protesting. The table official then informs the opposing team, all of the other game officials, and the other necessary parties that a protest has been filed. After consulting with the crew of game officials, a decision will be made immediately by the table official. The opposing team, meanwhile, must remain on the playing field until the decision is made. And obviously, this is very rare. You don't often get a protest on a game-ending play, but this is the protocol if you do. Another type of protest we'll look at is one that takes place in a game, earlier in a game. Such decisions regarding the playing rules are not subject to appeal. So immediately after a protest is filed, the TO gets together with the on-field game officials and makes a final decision. In the case of protest made by the coach or delegation leader during the game, not on a game-ending play, for a suspected wrong application of the Baseball5 rules, the game official who made the protested call will not be involved in the evaluation of the protest. So say 0-1 makes a call at first base that is then protested. 0-1 would not be involved in the conference in the evaluation of the protest. The other on-field officials and the table official would get together and make the ruling. The other 3 game officials decide together, and their decision is final, and then play continues. And I think that's a pretty fair way of dealing with protests, which again, we hope won't happen very often, but these are the protocols if they do. So there you see those final 2 examples of what the table official is responsible for. And our final slide of this module shows you that beautiful Baseball5 field again with one addition, that red box on the right side, on the first base side, which is the area reserved for the table official. And you see that by being on the first base side, they'll be able to communicate very easily with the plate official, who's usually, almost always located in foul territory on the third base side. The officials' tables is positioned between home plate and first base at the edge of the safety area, which is that area of yellow lines. And that safety area is needed because as plays happen at home plate, they often happen at great speed with the offensive and defensive player colliding. And believe me, those can be some of the most exciting plays in any game, and no officials want to interfere. So we keep the officials out of that safety zone and allow the players to collide if they must, but ultimately just make the play. And with that, we've come to the end of Module 3. So to all of our officials, thank you so much for your attention to this presentation. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. And we look forward to sharing more information about Baseball 5 in our next module.